what's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cinema Crusaders. It's Friday afternoon, Friday evening, depending on where you're at. And as always, that means that we've got another retro review for you. This week, we've got a movie that I think it's pretty topical with what's going on in the world today. You know, once again, the past has become present. For all of you Generation X or boomers out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is what we lived through with our childhood, and now it's coming back, unfortunately, to roost again, thanks to the little angry man over there in Russia. So we won't say his name, but you know who we're talking about. But before we get into that, let me introduce my co-host for the movie we're going to talk about today, and we are talking about none other than Dr. Strangelove. Or how I stopped worrying and learned to love the bomb. But before we get to that, I'm going to introduce my co-host. First, he's a fellow creator. He's an artist. He is working on his own universe as well as doing art for ASAP Imagination. He's also my fellow podcaster on Sloppy Spoilers podcast. I call him the Mouth of the South lovingly because he always has great comments to bring to you, and he's a South Carolina boy. None other than Jeff, Dr. Fate Bracey.
Oh, you meant me. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun movie to talk about. Well, given the circumstances and everything, it's certainly an interesting film. It's a bleakly black satire and very topical. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Awesome. My other co-host, I will say that Lance Lucero is not able to be with us today. He is enjoying Lucha Libre. So go get him, Lance. Get in there. Give him the chair shot for us, you know. So, but as always, my other co-host here, he's a fellow podcaster on Sloppy Spoilers. He writes retro reviews for Comic Crusaders. He's also a comic book writer and author in and of himself. He writes for Omen Comics and also writes for their Revelation Comics imprint. Blitz, look for that. I'm talking about none other than Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
This is not an exercise. I repeat, not an exercise. Anyway, I'm doing all right. I'm looking forward to discussing this, and I will say from the outset, I am not related to one of the stars of this movie.
Are you ready to go up on the big board? So,
yep.
All right, here we go. So
Lance, remember. Tell the wrestlers there's no fighting in the war room.
Exactly. I was going to say, and when we're talking about this, gentlemen, there's no fighting in the war room here either. Yeah. So Dr. Strangelove. Surprisingly, I have seen clips of this movie for a long time, but I've never seen the entire movie. So I came into this cold. And I thought, you know, it's time that I watch this movie. You know, it's an experience that I need to have. So this is going to be really interesting. We're going to go right through the plot and right into the characters. So just to sum up the plot really quick, a commander of an Air Force base basically loses his mind. He believes that fluoride is a commie plot to suck all of our juices out of our body and decides that in order to protect us all, we have to do a first strike nuclear attack. And because the way the system is set up, he's able to order the attack and lock everybody out. From there, the whole movie becomes a farce, you know, and the politicians are absolutely out of their minds. You know, they're so incompetent and inept and crazy. So are some of the generals, many of the generals. And you've got a variety of characters. And we'll get into the characters, I think, when we talk about the actors themselves. Long story short, though, the only people that are remotely competent and serious in the whole movie are the poor dudes that are stuck in the bomber that ends up dropping the bomb and causing Armageddon. Meanwhile, Dr. Strangelove himself, who I really want to talk about towards the end, is an interesting character. And I think whether they meant to or not, there is a backhanded comment on the United States and how they fought the Cold War and who they used to fight the Cold War. So I'm sure we'll get into that as well. So that said, I think we're going to go a little different because I think there's characters we have to cover. So I want to go around the horn with you guys. And, you know, we got that summed up nice and quickly, so we have some time. So let's start with one of the I'm going to say easier ones, even though not necessarily easier ones. Let's start with George C. Scott's character. And his name is, I got to look real quick.
Buck Turgidson.
There you go. Buck Turgidson, Journal Buck Turgidson. And I have heard, I want to hear what you guys have to say. I have heard that George C. Scott wanted to play this character absolutely straight, and that Kubrick made him do takes over and over again, and then took the takes where George C. Scott was being silly, for George C. Scott, and put those into the movie. And I think it works brilliantly. I also want to know where the hell Kubrick got a discount on chewing gum, because this guy eats so much chewing gum in the movie, it's not even funny.
And the actual scenery.
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. But for all of you out there who haven't seen the movie, George C. Scott's character is basically that gung-ho, ridiculous, can't see the forest for the trees general officer who's only concerned with winning the war and executing his plans to defeat the enemy without thinking about what the consequences of his actions are. And he is, like so many in the Pentagon, from my personal experience, incompetent in the worst way possible, because he's competent at being incompetent.
Yeah, it's only going to be 10 to 20 million American dead tops.
Yes. I think that is absolutely brilliant. I mean, that is basically what I thought Buck Turgidson was. He's a general officer who is competent at being incompetent. And there are quite a few of them, I will say, in my experience. But that's getting a little too personal. So I want to go around the horn here. I'm going to start with Jeff and then go to Steve. What are your thoughts, comments about George C. Scott as Buck Turgidson, General Buck Turgidson?
Okay, so let me start by getting into the name. So his name is Buck Turgidson. And there's a couple of names in here that are purposely funny. Turgid, let me look it back up here real quick. Turgid actually means swollen, pompous, bombastic, kind of beyond belief. And you can see all these things in Turgidson. And it can also kind of reference like swollen limbs, or even potentially an erect penis, if you will. And you see all of this in his character. He starts off in a sort of a sexual scene, and he's just, if you want to talk about like a toxic masculinity, if you will, like he is the raging male superego gone wild. He's so gung-ho, so rah-rah. And the legend has it is that when Kubrick decided to push things a little bit further, Scott wanted to play it more serious. If you'll notice, the first half of the film, Peter Sellers' president is actually a very dead serious character. You could have taken his scenes in the movie and put it into a drama quite easily, offset by George C. Scott's just over-the-top bombacity. So what Kubrick did is he proposed some warm-up takes, and just like, George, just let it fly, swearing that like this was just for fun, as goof, just to kind of, do like one of these acting exercises, get out of your system. This so infuriated Scott that he swore he would never work with Kubrick again. Another interesting thing about their working relationship is that George C. Scott is a skilled chess player, and he had differences of opinions about some of the things he wanted to do with the character. And in order to make a compromise, Kubrick played him in chess, and I believe beat him just about every time, if not every time, in order to get his way. And he said like he was really mad about the whole situation, about how he tricked him, but he had to admit he really respected him as a chess player. So that's a kind of interesting dynamic that the two of them had. But as a character, this guy is a total caricature. He's, remorselessly over the top. Everything bad that you would expect out of somebody in that sort of position of power. And it's really delightful watching this guy's face just kind of do like the Jim Carrey anime morphing that he goes through with like the most inane and insane expressions as he's just trying to figure out what's the new way to put America on top by like just utterly destroying the enemy. Just it's one of the things that keeps this movie from being too dark, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He's so out there that it gives you a break from how heavy the situation is.
I think the contrast, one of the funniest moments for me was when the Russian ambassador came into play. And you see the two of them playing off of each other.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely brilliant. I think it's also interesting that, George C. Scott was a very stringent, ardent pacifist.
Mhm.
And so you contrast this with his performance in Patton, which is also interesting. He took on the role of George Patton as a pacifist. And I think you could see shades of Turgidson and how he did Patton, so it is pretty funny, pretty fascinating as well. So, Steve, Buck Turgidson, let's have it.
I think you guys covered all the basics. You could definitely see that he's very good at playing generals. And Scott just has that natural authority. He has a certain level of charisma, and you can definitely see, that he attracts attention in every scene that he's in. And so when he comes on later to do Patton, you're not surprised. But at the same time, they're very different performances. When he's playing Patton, he plays it very, very seriously and true to who the historical Patton was. With Turgidson, you can kind of tell that, he's, I wouldn't say that he's playing it goofy, but the takes that he's in certainly kind of make it look that way. And really, that's by design, because this character was, I believe, modeled on a real general that was active during the 50s. And this guy's just kind of like a caricature of this extreme belligerent general who just wants to fire shots at everything and show off how hyper masculine he is, especially when it comes to like showing up the Russians. But it's funny, whenever the girlfriend calls, the Miss Foreign Affairs, which I just love that name, Miss Foreign Affairs calls. Here he is. He's like, "Oh, honey, yeah, you're gonna be Mrs. Bach," and he just softens his voice, to this really low level, and it's just really, really great performance on the part of Scott, and it's just absolutely hilarious. Both that scene and the scene earlier on when he's in the bathroom and he's just yelling from across the room, you can tell him to go away, because you can tell all he really cares about, is banging the secretary, and he has no interest whatsoever in anything that's going on until the situation arrives, and it's like, maybe I ought to go to the war room and see what's going on with the president and all that. I'm like, oh, now you want to do your job. now that you're being dragged, kicking and screaming into doing your job, now you want to do your job. And now you want to show off to the president how capable you are, when you're just a complete clown and you're just terrible at this job. And it's just absolutely hilarious. But the reason it's hilarious is because you can actually see like actual generals that might actually really be like that.
Yes.
And so I'm totally agree with you. George C. Scott is a treasure, a national treasure, and especially in this movie.
I also thought it was really, I don't know why this was so funny to me, and I wonder if this line was ad-libbed, but there's a moment when they're talking about the fact that everything has gone awry, that they've got 20 minutes before they enter Russian airspace and the war is going to start. And Miss Foreign Affairs calls up on the phone while he's in the war room, and he's talking to her. And just as he's about to leave her, he knows that nuclear war is on the horizon. He goes, "Oh, and don't forget to say your prayers to the woman he's banging." So I'm like, the hell is that about? It's like, I guess he's telling her, kiss your ass goodbye without saying it, or is he being? And
I don't know. They never say it, but I really have a feeling that he had a wife and this is his girl on the side. Like, he seems to be that type to me.
Yeah. It's just such a funny line, and it's right out of nowhere, because even though he's like having an affair or whatever with this woman, he treats her like a child sometimes. Saying this, it's so in character for this guy, and it's hilarious looking at it.
And what makes it even funnier is that when you actually see her actually interact with the general on the phone, she sounds more competent than him.
Oh yeah, definitely. Next, I want to hit on, there are a number of, I do have to say this, this cast is absolutely amazing. I mean, the cast is absolutely incredible. For instance, James Earl Jones is in here as a relatively minor character. He plays it incredibly straight. He's the weapons officer on the bomber. But I mean, James Earl Jones is in the movie. I mean, that's absolutely just amazing. You know, Sterling Hayden is in the movie, and we'll get to him in a second. You know, first I wanted to go to a guy. This guy really hit me as I was kind of, I don't know how to feel about this, so I'm going to go around to Steve first and let you guys come back to me. The lieutenant colonel that comes in at the end and captures the group captain, Peter Sellers' character. And it's Keenan Wynn plays Colonel Bat Guano. You know, so right off the bat, the name is just out of control. He was so strange, you know. So I want to hear what you guys have to say. Let's go to Steve first. Shadewing, what did you think of Colonel Bat Guano?
Yeah, that character is completely exactly what he sounds like. I mean, the name is chosen deliberately. He's batshit insane, and he's supposed to be. Now, I will say Keenan Wynn is not an actor I know from a whole lot, but what I do know him from, I love him in, and that was an episode of The Twilight Zone called A World of His Own, where he plays this playwright and who's kind of like caught into a love triangle with two characters that he created. Yep. Don't ask, but he's great in it. Okay, and he's great in this role too. So Keenan Wynn is one of those bit character actors who's just very, very good in this role. And as for this role, he seems to be completely oblivious. He doesn't know anything that's going on. If anybody's told him anything, it doesn't seem to register in his head. And he seems to just be, you know, preoccupied with the idea of perversions. Like he is this extreme anti-communist type.
Say it right. Preversion.
Yeah, preversion. You know, and he's preoccupied with the idea of preversion, as he calls it. You know, in the situation, and so he runs into Lionel Mandrake, who is the attaché officer to General Ripper, the guy that launched the nuclear strike, and he has no idea what's going on. It's like, who are you? Why are you in that weird uniform? It's like you don't know. You're going in there and you don't know anything about the people that are working in the command unit. It's like you have no clue. And it's just like nobody's talking to each other. Nobody knows anything about each other, and it just kind of shows you, like, you know, basically how information is kept so tightly within the system that they're showing here that nobody knows how to deal with anything because nobody's told anything. And so when this guy comes along, and you know, he might seem to be well-intentioned, but this guy is so out of his gourd that even the slightest, you know, amount of misunderstanding, you know, he basically takes it to a point where he almost kills you. He's just absolutely crazy, and Wynn just plays it up so well. Just a really, really, you know, great bit performance from a guy who hardly shows up.
I do have to say that Twilight Zone episode he is in is fantastic. I mean, it's worth seeing. I've seen him in a couple other things. I think he's a great actor, and seeing him in this, I thought he was really good. I want to hear what Jeff has to say, because as I was listening to you, my mind kind of crystallized on one of the things about this movie. It's very interesting watching it as a former military guy and as an officer, because on the one hand, I take it personally. On the other hand, I take it personally. So what I'm saying is that I could see how many civilians see this as the stereotypical or the standard for what it's like to be in the military. I take that personally because it's not. But at the same time, if I'm being completely honest, there are quite a few people and systems in place where it's kind of like this, you know. So
there are enough people out there that it makes you believe that they could be like a stereotype.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, one of the things that I take personally, and I'm just going to share real quick, and then I'm going to go to Jeff, is that for a long time, when you would say you're in the military, you automatically, people assume that you are dull, unimaginative, you follow orders blindly, you're not unintelligent, you know, et cetera, et cetera. The stereotypes just keep going. And depending on what type, where you are in the country, you really get those stereotypes. You know, if you're in Texas or down south, it's like, yo, you go, boy, military and everything, but you still kind of like, there's a stereotype that goes with it. So I get it. And I think that this movie kind of contributed to that. But at the same time, I got to be honest, there are quite a few people I've run across, like I was saying, competent at being incompetent. There are a lot of people that get promoted because they're competent at being incompetent. So,
And it's because people fail upwards in the system.
yeah. So that said, I want to go to Jeff. Colonel Baguano.
Yeah, this movie is all about stereotypes, really. I mean, that's why the turn of the president I find particularly interesting, because he starts out like apparently a very effective president, and as soon as you see him get on the phone with the Russian premier, he just falls apart. He turns into a complete buffoon like everybody else. And so I feel like everybody in this character is meant to be what the audience would take them to be. We expect corrupt or foolish politicians. We expect military people who are either dull-witted lackeys, warmongering buffoons, or just batshit insane. In the military, when I was in there, we would have called some of these people shitbirds.
Yeah.
You remember that, of course, Nim. So yeah, when I look at Baguano here, and again, the names are just so funny, so ridiculous, and it just gives you a little bit of insight. And like Baguano, obviously he is batshit crazy.
Exactly.
When you
exactly.
think, but he plays it so straight. I love how straight he plays it. While Peter Sellers' Mandrake is desperately trying to be the voice of reason when he talks to him. And so this goes into both the perception, the perception of the military was starting to change a little bit, and it would change significantly. But this is the Cold War era. We're full of paranoia. We've been, just hit with the Red Scare. We've got the worry of mutually assured destruction. And so, and like you said, and Steve rightly hit it, and Nemesis, you and I have seen it. While we have seen the military operate as a well-oiled machine, we have also seen where there is the one hand doesn't know what the other is doing. Sometimes in actual critical situations, this is need to know. And other times it's just because if you get any organization that's large enough, you will have a breakdown in communication somewhere. And that's really frustrating. And here it's done to a very it's done comically, geniusly comically well, but we see the frustration via Mandrake, who is desperately trying to save the Earth, and he's having to deal with a madman and now an idiot, and you just don't know what's going to happen. And like you said, so many people have these little hang-ups in the film with the pre-versions. And just like my favorite line is like, he keeps threatening to kill him. If you don't do this, I'm going to shoot you. We're taking you down. And he's desperately trying to make this phone call. And he finally gets through to him a little bit, and he has him raid the Coke machine. And he's like, "All right, mister, but if you don't get through to the president, you're going to have to answer too." And you're waiting like, what? The president, military tribunal, the Coca-Cola company. I just die laughing when I hear that every time.
You know why that line is so funny to me, though? And I'm curious if you picked up on this. To me, Lieutenant Colonel, for everybody who's not familiar, Lieutenant Colonel is one of those ranks, just like Full Bird Colonel 06, where you're very close to either being done with your military career or becoming a general officer.
Yeah.
And the line, you are so paranoid. I know tons of people who have been in that position. They're so paranoid about doing anything wrong because one little slip up, and that's it.
Yeah.
You will retire as a lieutenant colonel or full board colonel, and you won't make general officer. So, I mean, that's kind of what I got from that line, too. He's like, I don't even want to take responsibility for shooting the Coke machine. So.
You're what, just 3 steps away from there, like full bird, major, then general?
No, full bird, and then your general officer is right next. So, Lieutenant Colonel Baguano is 05. 07 is
he's
a
right
brigadier.
there.
Is a brigadier.
And they care more about corporations and corporate logos than they do about, the fate of the Earth.
And think about that. Think about what that says. Is like, it's not he doesn't threaten him with the president. It's like the most powerful thing he can think of is the Coca-Cola Corporation.
Yeah.
It's which is also relevant to today if you think about it.
Yeah.
How powerful corporations have become.
It really is. And once again, I would love to know, because I don't think Kubrick has any military experience. I mean, your point is well taken. It's just 1963 when this movie came out. Vietnam is just starting we're putting advisors into Vietnam, Bay of Pigs has happened. We have tied, drawn in Korea, so you're right. I mean, the military perception is definitely starting to change. And you can see that in this film. But I don't think Kubrick had any military experience. But
but it was based on a book by somebody who did.
Okay, because he hit on a lot of things,
I was particularly impressed with all the bomber scenes. All of that comes across as legit. All the steps they take in prepping and preparing the bomb, the code work, pulling the dossiers out of the safe, like all of that stuff looked 100% legit to me.
Yeah, and I don't know bomber procedure from and as well as anybody else, because that's not what I did, but I was with you. I agreed, and all the safeties and double checks and systems and redundancies, it absolutely made sense. So let's go into the
I wasn't Air Force, but I bought into everything they were doing.
Let's go into the bomber crew and the guy who flew the plane. So like I said, we had James Earl Jones is one of the people in there, but the whole bomber crew is very good. I mean, they pull off their jobs very well. The way that they conducted themselves well. I mean, even when the plane got hit, it seemed very serious, and Slim Pickens in his role as Major Kong, I gave you a break from what was a very tense moment. I think that could have been really tense. My favorite Slim Pickens moment, though, and once again, this must be the guy who wrote the book, because this is really, especially Cold War, this is the kind of, I'm just going to say it, crap they would do. And it's hilarious to me, was the survival kit for the plane crew.
Which, did you notice, was also loaded with gum?
Yes, tons of gum. $100 in rubles, $100 in gold. Okay, I can see that. You're going to bribe your way to get food if you go down. Stockings, lipstick, prophylactics, so, and then
10 different varieties of pills.
Yeah, all those pills, which is actually very true for especially Cold War pilots. They had
and of course your sidearm.
Yeah, and all that stuff. And then Slim Pickens, this is so true to what a soldier would say to this, or your normal, frontline person who is like not involved in the politics of the military. He goes, hell, son, we could have a hell of a weekend in Las Vegas with this kid.
That line was, they actually redubbed that line because the original line was Dallas, and then the Kennedy assassination happened. So before the film was released, they had Slim come in and change the line.
The original release date was on the date of the assassination.
Holy crap.
And they had to reschedule it to release it.
Yeah, so that actually pushed the film back and caused them to make a couple of changes here and there.
I did not know that. That's pretty crazy. So, and then there's the iconic scene with Slim Pickens riding the bomb down, But to me, I think the funniest thing about that is that Slim is kind of that gung-ho American from the World War II movies, where he's like, let's get the he's like, he gets shot, medic, and he's like dragging himself. And, he is James John Wayne character. I could see John Wayne playing this character. And he's up there.
He did so many Westerns in his career. Like that was his home as far as cinematically.
Yeah, they tried to get Wayne actually, and he just basically didn't answer.
Yes. But when he rides that bomb down, the way we get to that scene, and I'm going to let you guys hit that, I think is great, because I thought, like I said, I've only seen the movie. I'd never seen the scene. I had never seen the movie. So I thought this dude was nuts and was like celebrating. It's like, I'm riding that bomb. Yeah, I'm going to nuke those Ruskies. He was just like, it was more of a, well, F it, I'm going. I'm taking this baby down, So I thought that was pretty crazy. So I'm going to go to Steve first on this one and finish up with Jeff. What did you think of Major Kong, Slim Pickens' character?
Well, he's the one character that it was really kind of played straight, and he was asked to play it straight, and he did play it straight. He had no idea it was a comedy. So, I mean, if you look at him, looking like a serious actor for the most part, that's because it is. But I find that it's a really good contrast to everybody else who is crazy or stupid or both. The people that are in the cockpit are like the only people that have any sense, who know what they're doing. And of course, you don't want them to succeed, but they're the ones who are the most competent in the movie. And Pickens, I think, it kind of embodies that. Because he's their commanding officer. He's their leader. He's the one keeping everybody on task, and he does a good job for a good part of the movie doing this. He only struggles like towards the end after the plane gets shot by the Russians, and he has to go down into the belly of the beast in order to get the missile to work. The bomb to work. So yeah, there's all of that, and a lot of it is because he just has this down home, sort of Texas twang, and I've seen enough Texans to say, yeah, that this is a believable example of what a person like that would be. Both as an officer and as a Texan. So I totally get that.
I believed he was a Texan the moment the shit got real, and he pulled the cowboy hat and put it on.
So and that is such a Texan thing, waving the hat as he's going down. But I didn't think it was because he was going ho about doing the thing. I think it was because he kind of realized, okay, I'm going to go down for my mission and for my country. I'm going to do what I think is the right thing. It's the wrong thing, but he doesn't know that. From his perspective, he's doing the right thing. And he's doing his duty, and he's going to go like, okay, I'm in this situation. I might as well go out having a good time and be who I am. And I'm just going and damn the torpedoes, literally in this case.
When I saw the movie, it definitely puts it in a different context than just the short clip I had seen all those times. Yeah. And I also have to say, I think it's an interesting contrast that all of the senior leaders, no matter what kind of, scientists, politicians, generals, are incompetent, and we almost survive because they're incompetent. And we end up all dying because of the duty and competence of the lower level people. So there's a message there that I think we could break down. I mean, there's so much we could break down, but I want to get through these characters before we start really breaking down what's going on. So, Jeff, Slim Pickens as Major Kong.
To get into once again some relationship between Kubrick and his actors here, in order to keep this serious, Pickens was only given his section of the script. He didn't know that this was going to be a comedy, and like when you said you see that scene out of context, it looks like this movie is just a farce. It doesn't look like a blackly satirical serious comedy at all. This kind of bleak story that's being told. And, Slim incredibly plays it well. Everybody in the plane plays it well. And in a different context, you could take these scenes and put them in a different movie, and you would be rooting for these guys to accomplish their mission. They're like these several heroic sort of heroes that we've seen in situations like Das Boot or Kelly's Heroes or Guns of Navarone or any of a number of great wartime classics where, they're highly trained, they're dealing with stress, and, they're going to drive on and complete their mission. And Slim embodies that grand sense of Americana in his character where he's like, he rightly figures, giving Attack Plan R, that the leadership of the country has been wiped out. That's what Attack Plan R is all about. And he says, this is what I think is going on, boys. And, it's up to us to defend our homes. And he does his best in his down-home, humble kind of way to try and bring his crew's spirits up, bring up the morale. Let's get out. Let's do the mission. And he proves to be an absolutely aces commander, because the most important thing when you're in the military is always the mission. And when they take the hit, and they managed to get through all that, and that scene was as harrowing as any actual military film I've ever seen. Them striving to keep the plane aloft. When he realizes that he can't hit his primary or secondary target, where's the nearest target of opportunity? I've got a payload to deliver. I'm going to deliver it. So, like, not knowing what's going on, not knowing the tragedy, the comic tragedy of the situation, he is indeed the epitome of a real American hero, he and his crew, but especially him as the leader. And it's almost like watching two different movies when you watch the bomber crew versus what's going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I want to add one short thing because I just remembered it. He is the one person who, when he looks at his orders, questions them at first. So he's not doing his, he's not blindly obeying his orders. He actually asks them to recheck this. Are you sure this is our orders? And then once he realizes, okay, this is what they're telling us, he's gung ho with the mission and he's going to do it no matter what it takes.
And that's what you should do. As you should verify before you get ready to blow up a whole bunch of people. Nemesis knows, of course, like there's a whole bunch of safety protocols before you have an Apache start to fire a Hellfire missile down on somebody. You want to make sure you're in the right when you do that sort of thing. I forgot to add this. I'm sorry. Slim Pickens did that scene with the bomb, writing it down, over 100 takes. He had no voice at the end of the day, and Kubrick's mania drove him to the point that forevermore afterward, it was in his contract. He would never do more than 20 takes of a scene for the rest of his life.
I have to say, though, that's why I said about the World War II movies, because he really is that stereotypical American. When I said gung-ho, I meant it in the best way possible, not the worst way possible. Stereotypical, let's get this, boys. Let's finish our mission. American commander, soldier from the movies that you always see. And John Wayne played that in like Green Berets later on and stuff like that. But you see it in all sorts of different movies. So I thought it was such an interesting contrast that he's doing that. I mean, then he goes down, the commander, to fix the bomb doors, So it's like,
what a heroic movie, that moment that would have been in another film where he sacrifices himself to complete the mission.
Yeah. And there's so many layers to this. And like I said, this is a movie I think that has rabbit holes. I mean, I could go down rabbit holes and talk about one of them for hours. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm going to give you a preview of it. One of the ones that gets me here is the fact that I think you could credibly have a discussion about how junior officers and normal enlisted men are at the mercy of the competence of their senior leaders, because they're doing their job, and he did everything right and still did the wrong thing. So I think there's a lot to be said there, and that's just for everybody out there to think about, because we could have huge discussion about military ethics and everything. I will say that if we are evaluating his performance from a military's perspective, we're doing an after action review. He did everything right. So
I agree.
So that's it's frightening, and there's a disclaimer at the beginning of the movie. I'm curious, was this always in there about how the Air Force says that that could never happen? The version of the movie I had this disclaimer on it. Was that always in there, or was that added later? That this scenario could never happen.
They changed. They said, "Oh, this would never happen," and they denied it. After a while, it was like, "Yeah, we're going to slowly change our policy so that this can't happen."
Okay.
So it could happen, but they didn't want to admit it.
I thought that was very interesting, because right at the beginning of the movie, it stays up on screen for a full minute about how the Pentagon watched the movie and said that this could never happen and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, usually if a government office comments on something, especially like this, you could take the opposite of what they're saying as the truth. So, all right. One more before we get to Peter Sellers, and then I think that's where we're going to start really breaking down some of the layers of this movie. I wanted to talk about Sterling Hayden as Jack Ripper, Brigadier General Jack Ripper.
Jack Ripper.
The name says it all.
Yeah. This guy is batshit crazy too. Unfortunately, he not only is he batshit crazy, he has the power in the system to push his batshit craziness on the whole world. And then to top it off, he goes and kills himself at one point to avoid being tortured so that we can't do the recall codes, which I thought was just special. So I want to go to Jeff first. Give me your thoughts on General Jack Ripper.
My training in the military was actually in behavioral science. So this guy reminds me of a few cases we had. I think I might have told you, I don't remember if it was in public or private before, there was a drill sergeant who went a little off the deep end, and he was like marching his wife and family to their duty stations like work and school and stuff like that. And they're like, yeah, you don't take work home like this. And some people, that switch gets flipped on and they have a hard time flipping it off. And that's what I feel like kind of happened to Ripper here. He got so caught up in the paranoia of the Red Scare that he just starts inventing things, because we have to remember at this time, this was a big deal during the Cold War. Like, there's commies in the bushes, there's commies everywhere. You didn't want to be called a pinko or anything like this.
I have to interject as well. The whole fluoride controversy, conspiracy theory, is a real thing that still exists today.
Yeah, it was created by the John Birch Society. Yeah,
it still exists today. So,
I mean, call me a conspiracy theorist if you want, but I prefer to drink bottled water, distilled, whatever. I just don't like all the metals.
Preserve your bodily fluids.
Do you drink grain alcohol too? So,
on occasion.
Okay.
Mixed with some Kool-Aid. It's good like that. But the, this, and it's kind of funny how, once again, because there's another stereotype that we're getting into here, is the hypermasculinity and the sexuality. That's definitely a theme of the film. And when Mandrake asked him, like, when did you first notice this? Your precious bodily fluids being messed around with. He's like, in the act of love, and afterward, I felt weak and lessened. And it's like, you mean like everybody? And he starts going on about his virility. He doesn't understand, like, there's a recovery period.
Yeah.
So it's so farcical and yet so terrifying, because having worked in mental health, and you see things like that. You see people who get some really weird ideas and they believe in them 100%. And somebody who is a dyed-in-the-wool true believer is capable of anything. And so this guy takes steps to subvert the authority of our government. And, he's like a doomsday cultist, it's like, the best thing to do is, like, just go ahead and get the apocalypse over with, and we'll do it right next time. Scary.
Is it just me, or was there a hint of latent homosexuality in his character as well?
I did notice when he was very touchy-feely with Mandrake. He ran over there, threw an arm over him, put his hand on his knee. That was a very seductive move.
Well,
and he's professing his manliness and how women can't get enough of him.
Yeah, then when he was talking about his fluids and his juices when he was in the act of love, I got the impression it was like he was doing it, but he's not really into women, type of thing. That's kind of what I was getting a little bit.
Yeah, because he's like he's as Shakespeare says, "Methinks thou doth protest too much."
Yeah. The other thing I will say before I kick it over to Steve is that a lot of the military scenes, and believe me, I don't need military reality, realness in this movie. The more crazy it is and farcical it is, the better.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to laugh because this dude is holding a 50 cal, complete with a full thing of rounds, belt of rounds for the 50
holding
cal.
A brown 50 cal,
yeah,
bipod, no tripod, no nothing.
Yeah, and holding the barrel. After like 5 shots, that barrel is so hot it would burn your hand. And he's just like, da, da, da. I mean, that 50 cal is with the ammunition is probably a good 40 pounds, 45 pounds, and then that barrel is hot. So I was just like, talk about just ridiculous, male stereotype, uber, just out of control, absolutely out of control. And from a military perspective, I was just dying laughing.
I am holding my giant mechanical junk and spraying
Yep. I was thinking that too.
Yeah, so it's like, once again, I don't know if Kubrick did it on purpose. We could only speculate, but if he did, it's pure genius. And if he didn't, then it's unintentional genius. But
I love how he keeps a 50 cal in his golf bag.
Yeah. I'm just like, what in the world? Yeah, those things are like really heavy, and the barrels on any machine gun. I mean, that's an air cooled, but Yeah, they get red hot.
Yeah, for those of you who don't have the experience, like when we were firing the M60, you got to change out the barrel pretty regularly, or it's going to melt and deform, and then you're not shooting that gun anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it could actually deform to the point where it explodes.
Yeah.
So it's pretty crazy. Steve, the general here, and I've lost his name off the top of my head. So.
Jack D. Ripper.
Yeah, Jack Ripper.
Yeah, I just love that they picked that name. Like that's like the biggest thing, and everything about and really everything about the generals in this movie is about these people proving like what big men they are, and it plays out a different way than Turgidson, but it's the same general problem, and a lot of it is there probably is a bit of suppressed, shall we say, homosexual impulses going on, especially when you have your giant junk and you're asking this dude over here to feed your junk. You're feeding you with the belt, and it's just that's hilarious imagery. Sterling Hayden was really great in this role. He had come out of a 5-year absence from acting to do this. Kubrick persuaded him to come back, and I have to say he's just so good in this role. But the whole ideology is crazy, of course. I like that they play it for laughs. The whole thing with the bodily fluids and all of this is ridiculous.
I mean, I will say too, real quick on the homosexuality before I go down. I mean, you could even, if you really want to, start analyzing the fact that he's always got to have a big cigar in his mouth. I mean, it's
he has an oral fixation. This is
Freud would have had something to say about that.
Yeah,
and I really have to think that at least some of this is intentional, because Kubrick is always about the sexual imagery in every movie that I've seen him do, or at least that I can think of. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of it is that. It could also be that Hayden is like, I'm just going to play this up and, have a bit of fun with it. I think either is possible. Or that, Kubrick just took the takes that I think kind of embodied that to him. So, yeah. But beyond that, I will say, as crazy as he is, he's actually a smart commander. And the reason I say this is because he planned everything to perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything that he planned, he puts the planes in the air. He knows what rules to take advantage of, so that they can't do anything about it. He makes sure that there is no communication with the outside world, so that none of his troops, are persuaded to stand down. And in fact, they are ordered to shoot on sight anybody that they don't recognize, even if it's wearing the thing of a friendly. On the basis of, they're communist infiltrators, don't you know? Yeah. So everything has been neatly arranged so that the base is under protection, and that the planes, at least some of the planes, end up over Russia to do the job. And ultimately, he achieves his objective. He gets the nuclear Armageddon that he wants. So, I mean, if you're going to say that he's an antagonist, he's an effective one, because while he might be completely out of his mind, while his ideology is completely insane, I mean, this is a guy who actually, you understand why he's a commanding general, because he's the guy who thinks ahead. He's the guy that commands the loyalty of his troops. I mean, these people literally are following him to their deaths, and they have no problem doing this. And even Mandrake has a certain amount of loyalty to him. You can tell he respects him. And so, he's a fascinating character. I mean, and frightening. Because he takes like some of the virtues of a good officer and a good soldier, but it's twisted into a nut job who wants to cause Armageddon. Yeah. So he's a very fascinating figure, and Hayden plays him perfectly.
I think one of the other things I took from this character, and yes, he is out of his gourd. I agree with you. He's an effective commander. I also think that he's doomed to never progress past the rank he's at. And I say that because he understands the idiots above him, so much so that he accurately predicts that when he starts this war off, the attack's going, that the senior leadership of the Pentagon is going to be like, well, we're attacking already. We might as well, go in whole hog and just do it. That's what they're arguing for. And only the president stops them from attacking, in force, and I'll be honest with you. And I want to hear your guys' impressions real quick. that seemed like one of the most believable things I've ever seen in the movie. I can actually see someone arguing for that. Go, well, we're already in for a penny, in for a pound. We're attacking. We might as well try and win this thing. So it's like, which is frightening. It's frightening.
He knew Turgidson very well, because that was exactly his position.
Yeah, it really was.
No, you can definitely see a war hawk going in that direction, and somebody who's had to bounce between military life in Washington and the Pentagon, understanding precisely how to get the most out of the machine.
Yeah. And I'm tempted so much to just give personal commentary, because this movie really, I can't go down that road. It's like, because then we're doing a different podcast. So let's get to Peter Sellers, and let's break this down. So the three faces of Peter Sellers. I do know that there was supposed to be a fourth one, and you talked about a little bit, but I think the three faces of Peter Sellers, especially the last two I want to talk about, really allow us to dive, deep into the movie and some of the meaning. So let's get the first, and I think, I'm not going to say the easiest, but the one that has the least nuance to it, and that's the group captain. So Group Captain Mandrake. I think that one's pretty straightforward. To me, I think Group Captain Mandrake, I thought Peter Sellers, he's British. He played a British officer very well. He's the only one with common sense, to actually be like, what in the world, at least on that basis, like, what in the world are we doing? You feel bad for the guy, because he's a sane man in an insane asylum and trying to deal with all of that insanity when they're looking at him as he's the one who's out of his mind, So it's like, it's that 180 where you are the only sane person. So it's like, what do you, I think there's a question that goes something like, what do you call a sane person in insane asylum? Insane, because they're different from everybody else. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I got from Group Captain Mandrake. And you feel bad for the guy, because you see him desperately trying to fix everything. And then when he thinks he finally can, he thinks he's figured out the code, then he has to deal with bat guano, So Group Captain Mandrake, Steve, what did you think of him?
Yeah, I think that he is one of the least complex characters, I would say, and certainly of the three roles that we've talked about, he's or that we're going to talk about. He doesn't have a whole lot to say. He's the voice of reason in the whole thing, and he plays so well off of Sterling Hayden's Jack Ripper. He plays so well off of Black Guano, and I think the whole reason why you kind of have that is really you need somebody insane, to get the kind of comedy you need out of that character. Because honestly, Mandrake is a total straight man. That is what he exists to be. He is a straight man. Now he also, I will say that he does seem at times to be a bit timid, relatively. Now he's not a coward. I mean, this is a guy that has dealt with. He was a POW in a Japanese camp. He does at times like assert himself to say, "Yeah, you better give me the code." All of these sorts of things. But then there are times when you sort of tell that he's a bit afraid of Ripper, and I think with good reason, but it definitely shows on him. He's a guy who's competent and at least smart enough, but he's not quite effective enough or in a position enough or has quite the courage enough to shut Ripper down and just take the code from him, assert his authority maybe the way that he should.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, but at the same time, he's a good character to watch, and I think that he is certainly one of the characters that emphasizes kind of like the normal viewpoint more than most of the characters in there. I think between him and Slip Pickens, who was the other Peter Sellers character that didn't quite work out because Sellers had his ankle broken, twisted at the time. That was the other one, but those I would say are the two most normal, realistic perspectives in the entire movie.
I will say this, and I hope that Jeff isn't going to be upset because I'm not making a comment about Jeff. I'm just making a comment in general.
Yeah.
Group Captain Mandrake reminds me, at the beginning we see him in the computer room. He's the one in charge of the computers. There are many different jobs in the military. People don't realize this. Some jobs are very combat oriented. You know, we call them combat arms jobs. I happen to be in combat arms. And then some jobs are, completely administrative. You could be an adjutant general, and the closest you'll get to combat is filing paperwork, 50 miles away from an exercise or something like that. There are all sorts of different ways. Everybody there is a soldier. Everybody there has training and bravery, but there are different mentalities, and I think that's kind of what you're seeing here. You have to have a different mentality from combat arms to adjutant general to ordnance disposal, which is bomb disposal, military police. I mean, there are all sorts of different jobs. I don't think a lot of people get that.
Yeah,
I kind of got that there. So.
Just look at a show like MASH. All of those people would have had to go through training. They would have all had to qualify with a rifle. They would have all had to meet a certain physical standard. But what were they? They were all doctors and nurses. They didn't want to be out there shooting people.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that I definitely got that from Mandrake. And I think that is a nuance that I don't think most people would get out of this movie, but I definitely got it, and you could see that.
He's a paper pusher, totally.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, to be fair, combat arms people kind of look down on RIMPs. We call them rear echelon mother effers sometimes, when they're being arrogant, but they're just as important at the combat arms. I mean, even we would call people finance rangers who are in the finance corps. But you know what? If the finance rangers don't do their job, we don't get paid. So, Jeff, Group Captain Magic.
Yeah, I'm actually, upon rewatching it, I was actually more fascinated by Mandrake than I had been on previous watchings. I'd forgotten that he'd been tortured, and he mentions, he's an RAF pilot. And, when Ripper's asking him about, help me with the gun, he's like, oh, I was in a Spitfire, all I had to do was press a button. So, he shot down people. He is not somebody who's never been in combat, and he's seen what happens when you fall out of combat into the enemy hands. So by no way a coward, obviously, but he has not been a warrior for a while. World War II was a while back. And it's kind of interesting because Peter Sellers has some World War II experience. I don't know precisely what, but he was involved. So he brought that perspective to it, I think, in a way. Now, what I did like about him is this is a guy who's become basically a desk jockey. He's put that kind of thing behind him. He doesn't like to reflect on it. But now he's in this situation, and his initial reaction is, of course, to try and be the soldier who goes by the chain of command, do things officially. But when he realizes that's not the case and how hopeless the situation was, when Ripper comes over in his kind of seductive mode, it was hard to tell on the quality of the video because, this is old standard def. But I'm pretty sure that he had a tear crease down his cheek because he's thinking, oh, my God, the world is going to end. And he's having like this breakdown. He keeps fidgeting with the pack of gum because he's just not mentally doing well with it. And it's a tough situation being, especially when like the power to do something is right there. Now I've got this much larger, intimidating man who's got a gun, and if I could just do something about him, but he's thinking like I'm not a physical combat soldier. I was a pilot.
It's frustration. So, he's the only sane person in the insane asylum. So.
I thought so many things were going on in that context. I realized like what a brilliant little performance this is, and he ends up rising to the occasion. I watch as he starts trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation. First he doesn't want to aid and abet this madman, and then when he does, he starts trying to get into his head. Right. And then finally, he asserts himself. He really takes charge. He, like that old soldier, rises back up in him, and he takes charge, and he almost saves the day. And so and at the same time, even knowing everything this guy's done, he's still loyal to the fact that we're brothers in arms. He tries like, we're going to get you some help, going to settle down, everything's going to be cool. And then, of course, Ripper offs himself. So, again, we have these wonderful depictions of the stereotypical crazy, incompetent, warmongering evil soldier, but we also get these depictions of what really makes up a greater majority of the armed forces. These guys who are professional, who are brave, who are loyal, who are courageous, who know their job, who are patriots. And that's one of the things that makes this film so interesting. And, it was really fun getting back in there and seeing that performance again and having that takeaway.
I agree. And I would say, I think I think Steve Sellers is a treasure as well. Peter Sellers was an absolute treasure. Gone too soon. I think his performance here as Mandrake, one of the things that I took from it was the fact that he's struggling to hold it together.
Yeah.
He wants to just lose it, and he can't. Because if he loses it, then we're absolutely doomed. He's the only person.
Cowboys up.
Yeah. So I think that is incredible. And I think that it is understated the way it comes across, but you could tell in his performance. And that's why Peter Sellers was such a great actor in everything he did. I mean, think about the fact that he's playing this. He also played Clouseau, who is just crazy, and like crazy in a great way. He played Sidney Wang in Murder by Death, and the list just goes on and on. He played, What's New Pussycat? He was in that movie. Just all these different movies. He's absolutely wonderful, an incredibly talented actor, So, and that's one of the reasons I really wanted to watch this, because it's one of the few Peter Sellers films that I've never seen. So, besides the fact that, with everything going on, I thought it was very apropos. The next one I want to get to before we get to the character that really got me thinking was the president, Merkin Muffley. I'm going to start with Jeff on American Muffley. I'm going to start with Jeff on this one. I will be honest, Peter Sellers was so good in this role, I didn't realize until over halfway through the movie that it was Peter Sellers playing the president. So, yeah, I'm just going to put that out there because I really want to hear what you guys have to say on this, because this is such an interesting character as well. So I'm going to start with Jeff, the president, played by Peter Sellers. What do you think?
Now, once again, we've got to start off with the name. So we've got the name Merkin Muffley, and both of those things basically refer to a pubic wig. A merkin, for those of you who don't know out there, is a hair piece for down there. It's mostly used in movies to kind of hide the genitals if you're doing a full frontal nude scene. And for whoever knows what else, your kink is your kink, right?
Oh, man.
I love the double entendre of that name.
Yeah, you know that his name is Merkin, which is a pubic wig, and he's a bald man. So that's automatically just ironically funny to start with. There's something I really like about the film again is a lot of these characters, they have moments of duality, these arcs that shift. We saw how Mandrake starts weak and grows stronger. And in the president's case here, we see how he starts off being very commanding, very authoritative, very presidential. When stuff gets real, he's there in the mix. He wants answers. What can we do about the situation? You feel like he's going to be the guy who is going to fix things. And I really feel like I'm watching two movies again. And I'm sure that was intentional, that in another context, these early scenes with President, with Merkin, this would be the heroic figure. This would be, like Harrison Ford in Air Force One or something, or one of these other movies where the president is like the big hero and is going to drive the action, is going to make things happen. He's going to figure out a way to save the day. And so his banter with Turgison is such a contrast. And then all of a sudden, as soon as he's got to call up the Russian premier, everything changes. The gear totally shifts. And you find out that this really is a facade of sorts. Mm-hmm. It's kind of I almost feel like this is Kubrick's way of saying, this is what we think the president is. And this is really what he is, because we have the public face, we have private face. We see what's going on behind closed doors now, when he's in a situation that is completely out of his control, and he has to call the premier of Russia to help him solve this crisis now. And it doesn't help that the Russian premier is like banging hookers and is drunk at the time. So we even get like a nod that he's not any better either.
Yeah.
And so I love this again, you want to talk about the homoeroticism. You get into the sort of relationship sort of thing was like, no, I'm sorry. Well, I can be just as sorry as you. And it's like, no, do you think I'm calling you for that? Of course I can call you because I like you, but we've got something else. It's like I'm watching this boyfriend-girlfriend conversation go on, and it just devolves into utter chaos. It's like, guys, you got something more important to talk about. But that's the whole point of this side of things being this farce. And when you think about the context of things that we've seen in the history of our government, and we can even look at things that have gone on in recent days, you're like, yeah, I can believe some Three Stooges stuff like that is going on behind the scenes. And so once again, even with the shift in tone for the character, you still buy into it because there's a part of it that still believes there's got to be something absurd going on sometimes when we look at the state of the world.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to get back to his interactions, but I want to hear from Steve first. What did you think of the president played by Peter Sellers?
He was a really interesting character. I will say, just for some backdrop, that Muffley was based loosely on Adlai Stevenson, who was the Democratic candidate who ran against Eisenhower in the 50s. So he's kind of like a caricature of that figure. But I've really found that his cute at first, like what we see early on is like the president you want to see. Mm-hmm. I mean, he shuts down Turgidson a number of times, and every single time it's really funny and you just love to see it. It's like, I'm not going to go down as history's greatest mass murderer. And it's like, I really wish that more presidents kind of had that view and not wanting to be a mass murderer. But here we go. And then, you can sort of see that there is a reverse arc between, Mandrake becoming the stronger character and Muffley really kind of whispering sweet nothings to the ear of President Kissoff. I'm capable of being just as sorry as you are, which I absolutely love because it's a direct shot saying how both of these people on, the president and the premier are completely useless. And they are. They absolutely are. Like, neither of them are really doing anything to stop anything. The most that, you're getting is that, okay, maybe Kissoff's people are, shooting down like a number of these planes, but they still can't take down Pickens and his plane. So and then it turns out, we know exactly where they're going. Why don't we just set something up over there? Not realizing that that Pickens decided to be smart and redirect to a secondary target where probably nobody was. They're absolutely useless. He's a really interesting character, and I would say also that he's definitely somebody that has plays into the effeminate side. So the name Merc and Muffley really, I think, on the one hand, it sounds like American, and on the other hand, it has that that whole effeminate sound to it. So you get this combination of this character who wants to outwardly seem tough in all of this, and meanwhile is whispering sweet nothings to the premier and talking about how they're both completely sorry. It's just great. But I really like the character, and Peter Sellers is absolutely an amazing comedic actor, and he plays all these roles well. And you kind of have to look at the credits to really know who he's playing, because every single role he plays is so drastically different, even when they're in the same scene.
Yeah, I will say, like I said, I saved Peter Sellers to the end because I think his three characters, especially these last few, American Muffley and then Dr. Strangelove himself, provide so many layers and rabbit holes to go down. This is the first time I watched the movie, but as I watched, and I have only watched it once, as I watched it, what I got from him is, the person who wrote this is taking shots at the military, the stereotypical military mindset all throughout the movie, and this is Merc
Just say Merkin.
Merkin is his shot at politicians. There's a mental health. I think there was a study, a psychology study, that a large percentage of politicians were never breastfed, and so they are constantly looking for validation, and they're insecure in themselves, which is why they become politicians. I could see that here. I could see that personality. So when he's dealing with Turgison, with the superior, he has to exert his control because he needs to save face, And you were talking about the comment is like, I don't want to go down in history as the world's most mass murder. Well, that's on its face is a noble statement. You also have to take into account that he said the reason he doesn't want to do that is he doesn't want to go down in history as the most matter.
Yeah, he doesn't want the blame for it. Yeah.
And Turgison actually calls him out on that, right?
Yeah. So it's like he's more concerned about his legacy. And you hear this with politicians all the time. My legacy, my legacy. It's like it takes a certain kind of person to worry about more about their legacy than doing something to help the common people that are,
It's all about ego. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, that's the one part where they're insecure in their identity. So when they're dealing with subordinates, they have to clamp down on them, exert their authority. And you see this type of personality. You see this type of personality in the military a lot of the time. People that don't deal well with subordinates because they're insecure in who they are, But then when they're dealing with peers, and then often when they're dealing with people who are above them, they're kiss asses. But when they're dealing with peers, they have no ability to interact. They can't lead.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do anything. And you see that in Merkley here. And I thought it was just absolutely fascinating. Absolutely. I mean, I could talk for an hour about this, just dissecting every scene, because it shows all of the character flaws, not only of this president, but of this type of personality. And you see this throughout the whole movie. Which is why I say this is not the movie I was expecting. I was expecting a slapstick comedy, making fun of this ridiculous situation and everything. And what I got instead was a movie that has so many layers with some funny moments in between that legitimately made me laugh. But there's so much to think about here. What do you guys think about that? Real quick before we get on to Dr. Strangelove, about this idea about politicians and everything. I don't know if you guys had known about that study about politicians.
No, I hadn't heard that study before. That's fascinating. I don't necessarily know if I buy into that, but there's definitely things that can happen in early child development that will affect you for the rest of your life. And I've seen some really awful experiments that were done with primates, seeing what happens when you withhold bonding from an infant. And that it forever affects the behavior of the primate. So there might be something to it.
Yeah. I don't really know about the sociological aspects of it, but I think it is true that people that really want attention tend to be drawn to these kinds of roles. I mean, especially when you're talking about being drawn to the spotlight, being drawn to roles of leadership. Yeah, it would make sense that, this is a guy who got where he is, how? By, appealing, to people's goodwill and wanting people to like them, and shaking hands and kissing babies and whatnot. So yeah, this is a guy who, who's probably concerned about being reelected, or concerned about his legacy, whichever. And for that, he needs public goodwill. And if he also wants the people under him to respect him. So, he's sort of, drawn between those things. But, and at the same time, it's like, he's in a situation where he can't deal with the premier because, he's just not equipped to deal with somebody, who he doesn't have control over. So if he's not in a position of control, he's completely out of his element. So that stuff makes sense.
This is why our best president is still the guy who doesn't want to be president. This is why George Washington is still probably forever going to be considered the best president, because he's the guy who turned down being king.
Yeah.
And he turned down a third term.
Yep.
Yeah. And I will say that, like I said, I thought that line where he says, I don't want to go down in history, is just so telling, because I think the normal person would say, we can't murder all these people. They wouldn't be thinking about the fact that I will be remembered for doing this. It's like, screw that, It's like, we can't do this just because we shouldn't do this, So, so, I think that's really fascinating. It's something we could really get into. So the last one that I want to talk about before we wrap up and I let you guys give, a general comment on other stuff in the film, is Dr. Strangelove. And I save this one because this one was scary for me. This one was, to me, especially as someone who loves to read history, a backhanded way for me of saying that the Nazis actually won, even though they lost World War II. That when the Nazis were taken into the U.S. and Soviet Union to advise and help them beat each other, I think that whoever wrote this was their way of saying, you are letting the Nazis influence your technology, your policy, everything, so that you could be dominant over each other. And in the end, Dr. Strangelove, the Nazi, gives them an idea to the Doomsday Machine to go down into the bunkers and create the Ubermensch.
Oh, look, eugenics again from a German.
Yeah. And that was the point. And he's calling the president Mein Führer. And when he's talking about creating the suit, for all of you who don't speak German, Hitler was obsessed with creating the Ubermensch, eugenics, the Superman in German, the superior race. And they agree with this. Both the Russians and the Americans agree that this is the best way to go, is to select the right people to go down there, and they breed with the 10 women, and the politicians are all for it because they get to have relations with 10 women. And I'm like, I don't know if they intended to, but they just said that because we brought the Nazis into our collective folds in order to be dominant over each other, the Nazis ended up winning World War II, even though they lost all the battles. And I was just like, that was the most disturbing thing, because at the end of the movie, I'm like, holy shit. Excuse my language, but that's exactly what I said.
I will say that was intentional, because the book, Red Alert, that this film was based on, there is no character like Dr. Strangelove in that novel. This is a creation for the movie.
Okay. So, so that was my take on Dr. Strangelove. I want to hear what you guys thought. But yeah, to me, I never understood why it was called Dr. Strangelove through the whole movie. And then when it ended, the title took on even another meaning. It's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Love the Bomb. The Nazis loved the bomb because in the end, they got what they wanted. They created the superior race. And there's so many holes we could go down, because the only ones that are going to survive are Americans and Russians. So you can even say that they're getting rid of all the Jews and the Africans and everybody else, because only probably white Russians and white Americans are going to be down. There's so many holes we could go down there, but the fact that
all you have to do is write the computer program and it will select fairly amongst certain characteristics.
Yeah, it was just so disturbing to me. So yeah, my mind was absolutely blown at the end with that whole scene. And suddenly the ending of the movie for me, and I love that song, especially because I played Fallout 4, we'll meet again. That's just classic. But it's sinister. It's sinister, especially when you say we'll meet again.
Fallout 4 definitely owes a lot to this movie. You can actually see Fallout being a continuation of this film.
Yeah. Are we meeting the Nazis again at the end? The Russians, the Soviets, the US are going to fight again, and the Nazis are still going to. There's just so much, and it's like all of a sudden you realize that the Nazis are looming over this whole thing, and it's like, wow. And as someone who's a student of history, has studied Operation Paperclip and all that, I got it, but it was just another layer of my mind blowing from that. So let me kick it over to. I'm going to kick it over to Jeff. I want to finish with you, Steve, on this one. That's cool.
Okay.
All right. For those who are in the know, Operation Paperclip was the designation given to the operation to rush in and try and nab as many Nazi scientists as we could before the Russians got their hands on them. Because we all realized the Germans were making some really impressive technology, whether it was for good or ill, and everybody wanted a piece of that pie. who could get a piece of it. And so we cut deals with a lot of bad people, because basically, as many of the good people who were scientists who get out, like Einstein, got out before stuff got real over there. And I'm sure there were some people over there who were conscientious objectors, and they were just forced to do awful things. But there were a lot of people who were really on board when you think of people like Mengele and other scientists who just did the most atrocious, unspeakable, awful things to their fellow human beings. And so, yeah, we snatched up a bunch of them. And so Dr. Strangelove represents that Faustian deal, that deal with the devil there. Now, this is a character who only really comes into play in the third act of the film. And you can see him in shots every now and again. He's sitting over there like a body double, sitting with the crazy kind of Kissinger mad scientist hairstyle over there. And when he finally comes in, it's very impactful. And this relates back to another Kubrick film, I believe is in Lolita, this idea of the sinister man in the wheelchair. So there's a little bit of connective tissue there. And once again, here's the character who starts off, he starts off weird, but he gets way weirder the next time we encounter him. He's only really in two major scenes. And I find Sellers' performance here really fascinating, because Dr. Strangelove can't keep his eyes settled on anybody. If you watch behind his smoky glasses, his eyes are constantly wandering. And when you're addressing a singular person, you tend to look at that person. Or if you're addressing two, as he was in that particular moment when he's talking about when he's talking to the Russian attaché and the president, he should just be bouncing his eyes between two. But he's rolling his eyes all around. It's very disturbing, very crazy eye sort of thing. And I get this perspective that he's got so much going on in his head that's so bizarre, so dark, or that he's just so dark within himself that he cannot make eye contact with a single person for more than a moment. It's that I can't connect with you on a human level is what I get. And even though he comes across being played a bit for laughs, and he even makes some legitimate points. He has that when he says, "Oh, if you got a super secret doomsday weapon, it only works if people know about it," and that's a legitimate point. Everybody makes a legitimate point, it seems, no matter how wackadoo their character is in the film. So he has that, but he's constantly got this inappropriate smile the whole time he's talking about the end of the world and the doomsday weapon and everything they're going to do. That creepy smile just never leaves his face. And so again, you just have to wonder what is rolling around in that noggin. Mm-hmm. And to top that off, I think this was Sellers' idea to give him alien hand syndrome. You notice he has a glove on one hand. This kind of relates to another character who had a missing hand in another film. It was a mechanical hand that was covered with a glove. Not Luke Skywalker. And he borrowed one of Kubrick used to wear these leather gloves because adjusting lights on set, the lights get really stinking hot. Like they moved to LEDs, which has been a lot better for lighting guys in terms of like potentially burning stuff in yourself. So he borrowed one of his gloves for that. And the alien hand syndrome means that your glove, your hand acts on these subconscious impulses. Are sometimes like just stray thoughts you had, and then your hand acts it out, even though you don't maliciously want to do this sort of thing. And so his keeps trying to. There's a self-hate moment where his hand tries to kill him. Then of course there's the reflection of his past history with Hitler. He's like Sieg Heilen all the way, but he keeps slipping in that. Twice in the film he calls the president Mein Führer, my leader. So it gets pretty crazy like that. And then by the end of the film, when everything has just gone to pot, I feel like he's almost relaxed in a way that he can kind of like be himself a little bit more, because that's when the hand really goes out of control. He starts sliding out of his chair. He can't maintain his spot in his wheelchair, and he actually ends the film. The film literally ends with him standing, saying, "Mein Führer, I can walk." You know, and then we have bombs going off in the song, and I do get the impression, Nim, thinking about that your analysis is correct in a lot of ways. The Nazis won, and the Third Reich continued because we adopted that into ourselves. So this could once again be Kubrick's commentary on the state of things. And if he was alive now, he'd probably be going like, "Yep, called it." You know, that sort of thing going on, because the 50s were a time of great innocence for America. And then things started happening where we lost our innocence. And part of that feels like we did it to ourselves because we accepted evil into our breast.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Strangelove really represents all that. And you even think about the name Strangelove when you think about the homoeroticism, which was very no-go back in the day, the love of the bomb, the love of warmongering, the love of all these deviant, divergent things, and you really do have a strange love affair. And that's why this character, who's not even really the main character of the film really ends up being named after him.
Yeah, I mean, you could even say that the Soviet Union and the United States had this strange love affair.
Yeah.
They needed each other.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many layers to this movie. Like I said, we could go down, and the alien hand syndrome is another one, because you notice it's the alien hand that's, you know, you could say it's possessed to a certain extent, and it's the one that gives the Nazi salute, and it's the one that tries to kill Dr. I mean, there's so many ways you could analyze that. Like I said, we could talk for hours about this, because really, like I said, I was going in expecting a movie that I was just going to enjoy a farce. Instead, it's a movie that I could think about for a long, long time. Steve, Doctor Strangelove, because I definitely.
Well, yeah, I think you both covered a lot of what I was going to say, so I'll see what points I can kind of add to this. It seems to me like the alien hand syndrome is really a case where the hand represents who he really is.
Yeah.
And pretty much everything else you see is him trying to blend in and adapt into the American war room, and his kind of realization that times have changed, I have to adapt with them. But every so often you get the hand doing this Nazi salute. Every so often you get the hand, you know, reaching out and trying to strangle him. Like maybe because part of him hates himself for having to put on this act that you know, trying to pretend like he's going along with you know, with the American system, when in fact he wants to be a Nazi. Because that's who he really is deep down. Yeah, as for the whole idea of the Nazis having won, I think the problem is the Nazi ideology won more than the Germans themselves. This is clearly a case where they made a deal with the devil. They embraced, you know, one of the worst ideologies in human history, because they wanted their technology, because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't get it. You know, the fear drives a lot of what's going on. And in this case, it's fear of you know, the Russians striking first. You know, the Russians being, you know, hitting them with a nuke. So it's like we have to amass, you know, all this power and all of this, and because of that, we're going to be willing to make sacrifices, whatever's necessary to prevent that, even if it means working with some of the most evil people in human history. And that's what you end up getting with Strangelove. And yeah, that name absolutely is representative of everything, because not only is it, you know, love of the bomb, you know, love of warfare, you know, all of that. You also get the aspect of, you know, what is it that they're planning on doing at the end of the movie? Strange love. We're throwing out, you know, traditional sexual mores, you know, monogamous relationships, you know, to continue the species and create the Ubermensch.
Yeah.
You know, all of this really comes together, and yeah, this is a really creepy character, the way that he's played. You know, the way that he just has his head tilting like this. And there is a little bit of the Kubrick stare as well, not as refined as we see in later films, but there are definitely moments where there is a bit of a Kubrick stare when you really see somebody who is completely off his gourd. And Strangelove definitely is one of those guys. I mean, he's just absolutely insane, you know, still devoted to an ideology that is absolutely hateful and destructive. You know, while at the same time, mostly for the most part, staying under control. I found it interesting that one of the few points where he kind of loses himself before that is when the Russian ambassador says, "Oh, wait, you used the doomsday machine, but you didn't announce to the world that it was there. What's the point of having a doomsday machine? You know, if you're not going to tell everyone you have it."
Yeah.
So the whole idea, you know, the idea that machines are there for a purpose, and if it's not being used for an intended purpose, that sets him off. I find that a really interesting aspect of his character as well. But yeah, the guy's nuts, absolutely certifiable, perhaps the most certifiable horrible character, but also a character in many ways that represents what this movie is. And I don't think that it is lightly that his name was chosen as the title of this movie, because it seems to me like he's the one who comes out ahead in many respects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, just before I get into final comments here, and I'm going to start with Steve on that. Going back to my college literature courses where you overanalyze everything. So maybe I'm overanalyzing it here. I'll never know. But I think that the idea that at the end of the film that suddenly Doctor Strange can stand and he's the central figure is symbolic of Nazism, fascism rising and then becoming central.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that makes sense.
It's really there. And I often joke about this. If you can overanalyze and put anything you want into anything, but I think it's pretty apt here. It's interesting.
Think about the end of it. He's the guy with the plan at the end, and everybody starts queuing off of him. Who do you think's going to take charge once they get settled down below?
And if I'm remembering right, at the very end, before the bombs drop, all of the politicians and generals are in a circle around him.
Yes.
He's the central figure. Once again, frightening and terrifying to me. I was not expecting that. After I watched that, I was just like, damn, really makes you think. So I think this was a great discussion. We've hit on a lot with the characters. I want to give you guys an opportunity to throw out anything else that struck you that you really would want to share about this movie before we go ahead and wrap this one up. And I'm going to start with Steve.
All right, I will say one thing. I think that this movie is interesting because it's a warning. I mean, on many respects, not only, be careful of who you make a deal with, but also in the sense that a lot of the times when the end comes, it's not necessarily because, the people that you're dealing with, evil people doing horrible things and whatnot. It's because of the stupidity of people within the system, well-intentioned stupidity in most cases, or people that are, maybe have a decent idea of what they're doing, but are completely twisted and kind of screwed up. For some reason that they're in the service and they're not looking at things the way that a normal person would look at it. So I would say the combination of these factors, people working within a system, basically making human mistakes, and people not speaking to each other, lack of communication, bureaucratic stupidity, all of these elements, create a perfect storm that ultimately ends up taking out this entire planet. And sometimes, and it really also says that, you have good people on the ground doing their job, doing what would otherwise be a heroic act, and then they end up dooming the entire world needlessly, just on the basis of them doing the right thing. They're completely well-intended. And all of this, and what ends up happening is that everything is lost, not necessarily because of bad guys, but there are bad guys that are willing to take advantage of human stupidity, that are willing to take advantage of our weaknesses and make the world worse. And I think this is a lot of what Kubrick is talking about. It's not necessarily the snake you have to watch for. It's the snake handler who thinks that he's got everything under control and is bad at his job.
Yeah, definitely. Jeff.
Yeah, it's so interesting that this film was unintentionally prophetic in a way, because we just gotten out of a couple of very justifiable wars, global wars, and then in the decades to follow, we would see that we would get involved in conflicts that we really didn't necessarily have to get involved with, and if we were going to get involved with, we should have gone in and done what we said we were going to do. And it seems like that's a trend that follows. So once again, we see that it's our leadership that leads us to spend the precious lives of our ultimate resource, our men and women who are out there on the front lines. And we see, again, once again, the very heroic bomber crew doing precisely what they've been trained to do to defend the country. But if the leadership isn't worth a damn, well, then it's all for naught at the end of the day. So that's a big takeaway for me. And this movie is made 63, was it? And it's still relevant because of that. When you think of things going on in a current year, a couple of interesting things technically. The film, you might have heard there was supposed to be a pie fight at the end of the movie, which was going to be used instead of all the explosions as to represent the missiles coming down, because they had that huge buffet line. This ended up getting scrapped for two reasons. One, there was the even Kubrick decided, like, okay, this is just too farcical. He tried to make the pie fight a little bit more serious, and there was one moment, for instance, where Sellers takes a pie to the face, and George C. Scott's like, "Oh, look, our young president has been struck down," and then Kennedy happens, like, "Yeah, we are not going with that. That is gone." Another interesting technical aspect I thought was if you think about the war room was a created room, and it is massive. It's like 100 feet by 40 feet. You can't see the walls, the ceiling, anything. The floor was this polished black. So you really get the idea that they're already in a bunker. The war room's in a bunker. And what we can't see, because the film is black and white, the round table that they're sitting at is kind of based like a card table. It was even covered in a green felt-like material.
Wow.
It's lit above like a card table. So we literally have this idea of people gambling with the world. And so whenever you look at a Kubrick film, there's always so many details. Like that's why they're so watchable. You can watch and rewatch and always pick up new details and discover new things. And so if you haven't seen the film, or if you have seen it but it's been a while, go back and check it out again. That's my admonishment to everyone.
The last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to be very careful to say this because I don't want to make this sound like a political message. I think this movie really exemplifies why the logical fallacy of appeal to authority, or elitism, ivory towerism, however you want to put it, is so dangerous. And that's become a very real thing in today's day and age, where we justify arguments based on people having a title or authority. Oftentimes, as you see in this movie, those people are divorced. They may not be incompetent. They may not even be evil. They're in their silo, and they have lost touch with common sense and the common man. And everybody, this is a subject that's been examined endlessly. I mean, Shakespeare hit it with Henry V, when he walks around the campfire. So all of this has happened, but I think that's such an interesting thing. And I think there are many things to take from this movie for now, but I think that is one of them that we need to think about. It's like, you don't have to hate the people in authority, but, like any human being, you tend to become shuttered, and see things only one way. And I think that this movie really illustrates that brilliantly.
We know what I think the worst thing is they're talking about when they come out of the caves in 100 years, they're already planning the next arms race. So nobody learns nothing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's because the only thing they're thinking about, it's like, one of the movies the next movie we're planning on doing is a movie called Real Men. There's a line in there where Jim Belushi is a CIA agent, and they're talking about how they want to get the big gun, and the big gun will destroy the whole world. And they're like, well, don't you worry about destroying the whole world? And he's like, that's not their job, Bob. Their job is to protect the country. So I think that kind of thinking. It's like, well, we got to get the big gun to protect the country. Well, if you get the big gun and use it, you're going to destroy the whole world. Well, that's not my job to think about those types of things. That's the kind of thinking we're talking about. So with that, I think this was a great discussion. I think we could go for a lot longer, but I think we hit on a lot of really cool and important stuff. Really cool movie to discuss. I'm glad I finally got to watch it. So I want to say thank you, Jeff, for joining me.
Always a pleasure.
Cool. And thank you so much, Steve.
Oh yeah, I really love this movie. Always have for a long time, and Kubrick's always fun to talk about. And until next time, peace is our profession.
Cool.
Yes. Such a great visual gag.
Yeah.
While they're
So,
shooting.
On behalf of all of us at Cinema Crusaders, just want to let you know next Friday I'm going to be at WonderCon, so we're going to take the week off, and then we're going to come back, and I'm pretty sure we're going to do Real Men, a movie starring Jim Belushi and John Ritter. So until then, we'll see you guys. Enjoy your movies, and you guys have a great, great day.